Okay, welcome back to another episode of Kesser Dovid. We thought we were coming to an end, but it turns out we're really not. I mean, we're heading to the end, but we're not really there yet, which will give us more time, hopefully, to organize with Rabbi Dr. Katz to join us for the Siyum. It's amazing how many chapters we've done. Menachem, you're ahead of the game, We're not as close to finishing as we thought. Because we skipped over not only Kohanim, but in general we skipped over forensic, medicine and dentistry, and other related matters. But the importance of this, last topic that we've been battling with, would be a better word than dealing with, is really a prototype of what poskim are up against nowadays. By the way, Mitzvah Varshavai Shlita will be speaking tomorrow, opening the Yachikala, the American Agudi Yachikala, worth attending. He will speak tomorrow in the afternoon and opening, and then he'll give the second half of his opening. He opens every year. This year is on brachas. Last year was on medicine. This year is on brachas.
Well, that's because brachas just started the new cycle.
Right. So that was the chosen topic this year. It'll be at the Ramada. You might want to join. Of course, with Zilberstein, Shlita also will be giving share there. Had a very serious dilemma this evening because we had a meeting with Chaim Kanievsky, Shlita, and Rav Yitzchak Zilberstein this evening, and decided to forego it, to be with you, to move ahead in Kesser Dovid. It was not an easy decision. But in Mitzvah we'll be meeting with Zilberstein later this week. It's always fascinating what he comes up with. So let's look at a summary. But the summary is not only a summary, the summary is a conclusion. And in conclusion, I don't mean bringing the topic to an end. Conclusion, I mean it leads us to two conclusions. And I wish that our conclusions would be conclusive. But they are and they're not. Because
the conclusion is also a commencement.
Okay, right.
It's a new beginning.
Right. So we...
graduation, it's called commencement because it starts a new part of your life.
I don't know if the challenges of today are greater than ever before. I think they are. I'm not talking about the technological issues that don't have precedent, and when we deal with a topic today of can innovation override precedent? Can innovation override precedent? Wow, what a difficult topic, challenging topic.
What's an example of that?
We're going to get to that right after we finish the summary on this topic, which is an example of that.
Right.
Can we innovatively come up with brilliant ideas? And we'll see we have 8 reasons why maybe a Kohen should be allowed to study medicine and dentistry. And nonetheless, he says here, Rabbi Dr. Fred Rosner. Do you have Smicha? Rabbi Dr. Fred Rosner will read his conclusion, and then we'll back up a little bit. But before we read Dr. Rosner's conclusion, the overwhelming majority of poskim are of the opinion that it is forbidden for a Kohen to attend a school that obligates its students to participate in anatomy classes utilizing cadaver dissection. So we've been through that. And there are some lenient opinions on this matter, and we will go through the 8, just to summarize the 8 possible combinations. But you know what? Sometimes even if you have 50, it's still not enough. But we'll get to that. We'll see what it's enough for, what it's not enough for. It should be noted in footnote 121 that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach Zatzal and Rav Neuver Zatzal forbid a Kohen from even observing a cadaver dissection in the same room. This is a very stringent opinion. The Nishmas Avram brings an opinion. Now, maybe were they talking maybe in Eretz Yisrael? I don't know, even so, but their opinion is, because you have to keep in mind that this that we said, basically, little Kuli Alma, although we'll see one day or maybe they're not, that it is forbidden in our time for a Kohen to touch a cadaver. There is a lenient opinion that a guy, not that you can touch, but you can be in the same room. So a Jew you could not be, and a guy you can. And since, certainly in America, most of the cadavers are Gentile, is, and we have courses here all the time, they bring from Canada, cadavers, and we have all types of updates on them which are fascinating, but they are all Gentile. And I have to remark on the incredible amount of respect they give, limitations on how we're allowed to speak in the room, how we're allowed to act in the room, the respect, the cover of mace, even though we're talking about a guy, is amazing. But to be in the same room, and then Rav Shlomo Zalman and Rav say you can't even be in the same room. Okay. Rav Tendler, Rav Dr. Fred Rosner write, under the usual academic conditions, meaning that you have to touch a cadaver, a Kohen is not permitted to study dentistry because of the requirement in the United States medical schools that students take anatomy and pathology courses. It is impossible for a Kohen to attend medical or dental school. That's Dr. Rosner's psak. If, however, a few lines later, and I would imagine that I almost can't see why not. I mean, I can see why the argument would be not to allow a student not to touch. And when I was in school, there were Kohanim who made every effort. The truth be said, that when they found out, I believe he was either left back or, in essence, dismissed, they wanted him to touch the cadaver. Is there a difference if you're wearing gloves? Let's see. If, however, the dental student can avoid actual dissection and attend only as an observer, and if his early dentistry training does not include a human skull with its dentition, then there may be dispensation for a Kohen starting dentistry. Because with medicine, it doesn't end there, and we won't go into, because he writes here, it's beyond the scope of this book, to bring up a topic that we did bring up, and Rav Asher Weiss Shlita was very strong about it. There are still endless issues of a Kohen being in a hospital where every day there are people who die, and he says clearly that a Kohen cannot work in such a hospital.
Moshe has a tshuva of, right, can a Kohen take a job in a hospital?
Oh, he does. And what's his conclusion?
Because there are always these corpses.
Do you remember his conclusion?
It doesn't matter if it's a Jewish corpse or a non-Jewish corpse.
Do you remember his conclusion?
Corpse is a corpse.
Okay.
His conclusion is it's better not to.
Better not to. Okay. We follow the lenient halachic ruling that a non-Jewish corpse does not convey ritual defilement to people in the same room. I want to stress we brought this. This is only because of the...
It's too much oil.
Of medicine, of possible mitzvah of medicine, of possibly saving a life, but in general we are machmer. A Kohen should not go, if a Kohen is working in a Gentile firm and his partner passes away and he has to go to a Catholic or a Christian wake or sorts, from what we learned, from what I recall, we cannot be lenient. Here the leniency is because of looking for a way to study medicine. Unlike the physician, the dentist is not usually involved with the dying patient, death certificates, the mortuary etc., which pose seemingly insoluble problems to a physician who is a Kohen. What are the combination of leniencies that could possibly okay a Kohen to study medicine or dentistry? One, the position that the ban against defilement by Kohanim is not applicable nowadays. Certainly not the prevalent opinion. A Kohen,
everybody's to me already?
and we said, even though you told me already, it is compounded. It's
Yeah,
not
you're
like
not allowed to add to it.
once tell me, always tell me. Each and every time, the majority of poskim and the way we stand
It's an issue.
is it's an issue. Two, the opinion of some poskim that nowadays our Kohanim are considered Safek Kohanim, doubtful Kohen status. Here they're walking around talking how miyuchas they are, how they have a pedigree all the way back to Aaron Kohen, and all of a sudden when they want to go to medical school, well, yeah, well maybe I'm not a Kohen. Since their genealogy is uncertain.
The youngest Kohen was Rappaport. He was
Right, and there are Rapports that are not Kohanim.
Right.
3, the position of some Rishonim that a Gentile corpse does not convey defilement by touching. This is really an outside position. Okay, but we're saying, yeah, we're talking now, svek. But you know what? On Shabbos, if you have a D'Rabbanan, it doesn't matter. It could be 20. You still can't do it. Unless it's for a sick person, tremendous pain, tremendous monetary loss. There are cases where you can, but in a regular situation, no. But there are those who want to argue that studying medicine is not a regular situation. 4, the position by some that the Kohen's obligation to avoid Tumah is rabbinic in our time, and that the study of medicine is a bona fide mitzvah of refuah, and a fulfillment of the value of kavod habrios, respect for humanity, which can set aside rabbinic decrees. An outside svara, outside, how would you say, svara, logic, outside argument.
Like Rabbi Tshuva says, you're not mechuyev to become a doctor, but once you are a doctor, then you're mechuyev, and rappo you're rappo.
Right.
And the Shulchan Aruch says,
we saw
nit rishus l'roife l'rappois, u'mitzvahi.
but not a chiyuv. So if it was a chiyuv, then maybe you could argue to put these things together. But there's no chiyuv, there's no obligation to become a doctor.
We have rappo yerape. Today's parsha, 2 weeks ago, we had the Parshas Boy, we had the Ki Ani Hashem Reifecha.
5, the position that potential saving of lives is also in the category of Pikuach Nefesh, even though it's not before us now, even if down the line.
That's the Noidi Yehudos, as the Foneinu patient has to be.
Why should I stress that in last year at the Yachikala, that, how far do you go? But just because a doctor somewhere, sometime, when you least expect it, he might be in a position where he might save a life, well, anybody might be in that position. 6, Rav Goren's disputed suggestion that I still do not understand, although last time somehow I tried to understand it, but the way it's worded here, my understanding falls to the wayside. Rav Goren's disputed suggested the wearing of a tummy metal object by an already tummy Kohen enables him to then touch a corpse, relying on the concepts of cherev kechalal, ein tuma achar tuma, and tuma l'chiburin. So a combination effect. My question was, and what permits the Kohen to put on this metal object? So I might be missing something here. I tried to understand last time, maybe the guy is wearing a ring. He already has an object, so he's continuously being defiled 24/7.
That's flying on an airplane now. They make the plane is made out of metal, but it's not made out of the metals of the metame. It's made out of aluminum. Most planes.
Many Kohanim take the Sunday afternoon Newark flight because there are no Mason born on that flight, and no corpses, and it does not fly over the Cholon cemetery as we mentioned in the past. 7, the suggestion that by wearing gloves the Kohen may participate in dissection because he is not touching, he is only touching the gloves, considered a kli, a utensil, and that would be only a rabbinical prohibition. So we have compounded rabbinical prohibitions, and not the corpse directly. Again, this supposes that in issues of refuah, where a mitzvah is involved, the sages set aside rabbinic decrees. So we're making a lot of assumptions here. 8, the assertion that a combination of several of these possibilities is a valid application of the established halakhic mechanism of svek, sveka, legula. Or no, just because you have 10 svekas doesn't mean that you can be lenient. As we have explored, and this is the key and the bottom line, all of these reasons have been challenged or dismissed by the overwhelming majority of respected rabbinic authorities for an assortment of reasons. They have asserted that many of these concepts have been misinterpreted or misrepresented. In other words, if you take them one by one, it's impressive that you have 8 maybes, but if you take the maybes one by one, there's nothing. In any event, we must always keep in mind that established halachic practice should not be changed capriciously, and that care must be taken to safeguard against a deterioration of Torah observance. I want to read this again. The challenge. You know, I was at a meal with Rav Tendler where they served grasshoppers. Okay, and Rav Mahmoud was there, and he said, we have Masorah.
That's a mutter food.
Right, they have a Masorah. And I asked Rav Tendler, will you eat the grasshoppers? And I said, can we rely on Rav Mahmoud's Masorah, on the tradition that he's handed down, which are the kosher grasshoppers? And he said, I don't know. Well, one thing I know, Masorah is not docha bal teshakzu, it's not for shamseka. He said the Masorah, the tradition, can't allow you to do things that are disgusting. Okay, for us it's disgusting as Chinese eating brains out of a skull and snakes and cats.
And scorpions and all sorts of
And
stuff.
scorpions. And the Chinese cannot understand how in the world we eat chickens. They think it's the most disgusting thing in the world that a person could eat a chicken. Okay, so there is a cultural factor, we will go to that. I, with tremendous hesitation, bring something that's not brought here, and maybe I shouldn't. But since I was personally involved in the event, it was eventually published in one of the volumes of Igros Moshe, what's called the new volumes of Igros Moshe, and that was regarding a Kohen marrying a divorcee. And may God protect me, but since it's in the Igros Moshe, I will cite it, and I don't know whether or not that can be pulled out of the sleeve as a game breaker. Rav Moshe said, and
This is according to his grandson who compiled the
well,
volumes.
he put them together, but the chuvas themselves are Rav Moshe's, and Rav Moshe told me directly, indirectly, I have a friend who was a Kohen who wanted to marry a divorcee, and I saw the letter. Rav Moshe said if I would have the strength, I would come be Masal the Kedushin for this quote-unquote Kohen. And of course I contested it. I thought this was crazy. And while I'm walking the street, Shalosh Shudas time on Shabbos, my friend says, oh, look who's across the street, Rav Tendler's grandson. So I went over to him and he invited me to his father, Rav Yaffa, to Shalosh Shudas. And he said, yes, I was there when Rav Moshe said it. And in the next volume, there'll be 2 chuvos, 2 responses on this very matter. And again, I'm going to say it a little bit cryptically, but he said, number 1. And I always say, do you ever notice what a disproportionate amount of Kohanim, about Bali Tshuva Kohanim? Well, my argument is, yeah, a guy says, listen, if I'm a Yisrael, okay, I'll stay religious, but if I'm a Kohen, that's a real waste. So maybe the guy feels special, and so they're more inclined. Rav Moshe says no. Rav Moshe says that many of the Bali Tshuva, I'm just quoting what he said, it's in the Tshuva, that many Bali Tshuva fabricate, somewhere along the line it was fabricated that they're Kohanim. So that's the first something he said. And he was talking...
You can look for the gene.
Yeah, but that's not... We're going to talk about that when we get to forensic dentistry coming up, because one of the best sources of DNA is actually the human tooth, the pulp of the human tooth. And in 9/11, unfortunately, this was real, and unfortunately I was called to identify. The only way they could identify, everything was so burned that the only thing that basically was left was the teeth. And the number of teeth, which ones have fillings, there's a combination that's basically, and we'll see when we get to the chapter on forensic. But the second one is that it specifically says that children of Holocaust survivors...
After 9/11, they identified the bodies by the teeth.
Right, exactly. So I know this is going to stir a ruckus. Fortunately, nobody on the other end of the video can stone me, and I didn't say it. I'm only the messenger. Children of the Holocaust survivors, the mothers are b'chazaka, are, I would not say in English chazaka, it's fairly established that the children lose the status and rights of a Kohen. And so Moshe said, this is not something to publicize, but in cases where push comes to shove, as we'll see in the next chapter again.
I'm a child of a Holocaust survivor, but I'm not a Kohen.
Right. I'm a child also, and I'm not a Kohen either, although there are stern Kohanim. But he says the combination of these two, as we'll see, we'll read Rav Moshe's quote in the next chapter, of when it comes to issues like that, it is something one could rely on. Would that be an added leniency when a Kohen was, I always say today, there's only one reason to become a doctor today. And that is you get up in the morning and you can't imagine doing anything else in life. So what do you do? I'm going down a case where a kid, he just was born to be a doctor, and he would basically commit suicide if he didn't. Well, that may not be enough. But in such a case where a kid is so driven, can you combine his leniencies? And if this kid was about, his father was about tshuva, and his mother went through the Holocaust, would that be an added leniency? I'm not the one to ask. And in fact, as we'll see, of course, because of the sensitivity of these subjects, one really needs to discuss it with a competent rabbi. Let's go on.
Moshe Tikal, for many years, was a Kohen.
He thought he was going?
See, he even he did pidyon on both Dovid and his son Nehemiah, and then they had to do it again when he found out he wasn't.
Well, there was a film that was going around a few years ago about this guy who discovered.
No, he visited. There was something on the cover that indicated, not that he was Levi, but something on the cover indicated of parent that he couldn't possibly be a Kohen.
Wow.
He didn't have the hand sign on the cover.
Yeah.
Well, that's
I was in Warsaw last week, and all of the monuments of Kohanim, you see the
right. Yeah.
the interesting child I saw this week. I think the column of Rebbe is talking about who brings a Shiloh. If a Kohen whose fingers are fused, can he go up to Duchen or not? Because the bracha comes from between. Besides the mum, you would have to cover it up with a talus today. Anyway, interesting question. Okay, let's get to really the crux.
Something that could be fixed by cutting
That's
something.
a good question. Probably yes. Interesting. In any case, to get there.
It's called webbed hands or webbed feet.
Can innovation override precedent? Listen to those words, because we are living in the age of torn between two lovers. A love for innovation and a love of respecting precedent.
What page you
On 286. And wasn't the Chassam Sofer in this very arena with the status quo, conservative reform, the battle? And does the decision become black and white what Allah says, or in times when status quo was so effervescent, did he need to take positions that kept that in mind? So the issue that really comes out of this whole chapter of Kohanim, for most of us who are not Kohanim, is can we come up with 8, and I just added another 1 or 2 to the list, of allowing a Kohen who was traditionally not allowed to study medicine to study medicine? Does it override precedent? Do we say, fine? I have a personal correspondence with Moshe Feinstein in 1980, where I wrote 18 pages of questions for Moshe, and it took him 5 years to respond. And they held a symposium in Manhattan of Tedla, answers to the doctor's questions. I was already living in Israel by then. But one of the things that Moshe wrote in that tshuva, in that responsa that was recorded and lost, I think forever, was, I will see the difference in the word. Rav Soloveitchik really, puts it in a nice, neat phrase. But Moshe said, we paskin based on what we know. We make our lucky decisions based on what we know and what's explained to us. And I'll give you an example. There's a very not well-known response of the Aruch HaShulchan, who is known for permitting certain levels of using electricity on Yom Tov, on the holidays. And I have a tshuva at home that I put out.
That's Shlomo Zalman wrote a whole sefer on that.
Okay, electricity in Allah is a challenging topic. But he writes over there, I must admit that in my town there was no electricity. And had there been electricity, and had I had a better understanding of what electricity is, I may have actually taken a different position in halacha. And this is what Moshe was saying to me in the tshuva. He says, if you tell me, an example we keep on coming back to, and actually was at the symposium last year at the Yachikala in the Ramada that starts tonight, tomorrow morning. If you have an avulsed tooth, if a tooth comes out, the psak was across the board. Across the board that you cannot put it back in on Shabbos. It's not Sakonis Aver. The tooth is not considered on Shabbos an Aver. It's not considered a limb. And even microscopically, we know that it has flesh on it and has arteries and veins and nerve, everything. Halakhically, it's not a limb. You're not allowed to put it back in. So I had a kala the day before a wedding. She knocked out her front tooth, and I cleaned it off and I put it back in on Shabbos. And the reason I put it on Shabbos was Rav Moshe's decree that innovation can override precedent. Now that you're explaining to me, and Rav Moshe Weiss in the back of the Sefer, we brought it up so many times already, agrees with Rav Moshe Feinstein, that since it is part of the jaw, and every tooth in the jaw plays a function in the function of the jaw, and the jaw is considered an aver, you're allowed to put back the tooth on Shabbos. Now, Rajil Arbach at the symposium last year would not accept it, but Arsha Weissleiter, well, what I want to bring here, the koyach, the power of Rav Moshe and Rav Moshe Weiss to say, not so what. Even though the greatest poskim said you're not allowed to put in, that was based on their understanding of what you're doing when you lose a tooth or put back a tooth. And they say we have enough reason. Binu shnos dor v'dor. We must understand each generation and its needs. For example, plastic surgery. We talked about so many times that is the need today the same as it was 100 years ago? For men, for women. So let's see inside. The view of Moshe Feinstein, okay, it would be improper to ignore this subject. The view of Moshe Feinstein is that it is the role and responsibility of every Torah scholar to step forward and advance his ideas in order to solve extremely urgent problems that confront us. And I can testify, Rav Arsha Weiss is considered Shlita as a world authority on medical halacha, has more on his plate than he can deal with. I don't know how he does it. I mean, the thought that has to go in, like the Ramban writes in Shabbos, it's almost impossible to compare one thing to the other, because on one hand, on the other hand, you got a fiddler on the roof, on one hand, on the other hand, and you're torn between the one hands and the other hands. Rav Feinstein's views in 123, I'm reading in the middle, has there already been an end or boundary set for Torah study? Certainly, in my humble opinion, it is forbidden to say this. Torah study will continue to flourish. Rav Moshe Feinstein is saying this is a living Torah. And we cannot just say, okay, that's the psak, that's what was said, finished. What Rav Moshe Feinstein went through with the Satmar Rebbe, Zekel Tzaddik Levracha, over artificial insemination, it's unbelievable. Satmar Rebbe holding on to tradition with both hands, understandably so. Rav Moshe Feinstein holding on to the needs of the generation and the innovation without being called a Reformed Jew. I'll give you an example.
But finally, he said, my psak was only for this one case.
One
It
case?
can't be generalized.
I don't know. Okay, you say. I'm not familiar. But I was indirectly involved in go-betweens in camp when Rav Moshe Feinstein, I'm trying to think which way it went. Rav Moshe Feinstein said to Shlichim, he said, don't talk to the Satmar Rebbe in learning. He'll wipe the floor with you. And they didn't listen. The Satmar Rebbe sucked them into the learning of the sugya, and they came back like, ringed out rags.
Satmar Rebbe was a tremendous Talmud Chacham.
Tremendous Talmud Chacham. This we heard directly. We asked Rav Moshe the famous tshuva on drinking not chol v'shol milk, and the famous tshuva. He wrote mainly for out of town. But he said, if it was up to me, I would bring not chol v'shol milk into my yeshiva. For the price difference, I could keep another boy in kollel. Oh, I was an 18-year-old boy, and I was pretty on top of things. And he said, and this I almost went through the floor, several floors, and he said, but what should I do? The Satmar Rebbe Shlita does not agree with me, based on the Pri Chodesh, and since he's the greatest Talmudic scholar of our time, I cannot do it. And I, with my 2 flags waving in the air, singing.
What a compliment to the
Just-
Rebbe.
Yeah. So he said, I cannot go up against Abba Rebbe as long as he doesn't agree with my opinion.
Reminds me of a tshuva my sister-in-law's got from her vice. She had always wanted to bring her father here.
Now Moshe has a tshuva on that.
Well, the vice told her, use the money better to support yeshivas here. Period. And
But that's based on a Zohar.
it satisfied her.
So they were being diplomatic, because the psak really is based on a Zohar that says, Lo sitamos arsi, it says, woe to the person whose soul leaves in the diaspora and is brought here to bury. When you were alive, you didn't come, now you come. So Moshe has a tshuva, Rav Yosef has a tshuva, they want to bring Montefiori's bones. But there's a loophole in the Zohar. The Zohar says that a person who was brought after death to Israel, the land will shake him off like one shakes dirt off of his talus. And what's the loophole of the talus? Unless he had an attraction, a love, a longing to come to that show. The people have good reasons why they can't come. They may be financial, they may be social, they may be psychological. But were you dying to come? Literally. And so Mandel's makes a living, and the heter basically is. But I've been involved in several cases where Gedalia Dar gave all kinds of side answers, but really it stemmed from the main answer, which was that a person who did not come in his lifetime, it's preferable not to bring him after death. However, if he was truly an Ohev Eretz Yisrael, then it is more to, and they brought, who was a big Ohev Yisrael, the Montefiore. But let's read on. Rav Hershel Schachter, ourselves, obviously like a halacha. We got to rise to the Sabot to be B'chal Shabbos. You have to do it? Of course not. Rav Hershel Schachter elaborated at the Council of American Convention. He stated that all rules which seem to prohibit a lesser and later court from ruling against a greater and early court do not apply to understanding halacha, but rather apply only to rescinding a takana. If an edict was made, then this principle holds that unless they're greater in number or in wisdom. But that's all talking about where they made a decree. But in understanding halacha, a bezdin can come and say, or a gadol today can say, wow, based on what the engineers and the physicists and the doctors explained to me, we're understanding today. I'll give an example that came up last year at the Afrikala in the Ramada. They now can make meat. They can now make meat.
From muscle cells.
No, they can take a cell and they can make artificial meat.
But
Is it
that is basar. Because they have this fake, the very, very popular now, these fake meats. that
No,
are-
this is they can use stem cells or something like that, and they can actually generate meat. Is it fleshing? Can you not have meat and milk
They
with
had a
it?
few years ago in America fake bacon.
Oh yes, I've had that. It's very good, but that's made from duck.
Kosher bacon.
In any case, so what is the status of that meat? Is it meat and milk? And there are endless new innovations like that. With our understanding today, Rav Shechter said we cannot base halacha on status quo. Those who merely recite the Mishnah bring destruction upon the world. It says in Sota, so what the Mishnah said, that's the end. Okay? There's a Gemara, there's a Rishonim, there's a Tur, there's a Beis Yosef, there's a Shulchan Aruch, there's a Mishnah Berurah, there's a Aruch Shulchan, there's a Shmir Shabbat Chasa, there's a whole evolution. But it says in the Mishnah, interesting, it was in the Daf Yomi now, which I'm not doing, but it intrigued me a little bit. It says that it's forbidden to put on perfume or cologne. A man is not allowed to put on. Well,
Basil Bashkeva.
no, not about Silver Gev at all.
It's part of
It's not about Silver Gev at all. It's about the Choshen for Mishkav Zocher. You're allowed to put, then he said, the Rambam brings it. He doesn't bring the reason. And the Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring it at all. So,
It'll make him,
well, I saw the Gemara Mem Gimel and Beis of Brachas.
Is
That's what the Gemara says in Brachas Mem Gimel and Beis. If you want an explanation, your son in his
Today's-
Daf Yomi.
Today's Daf Yomi.
Oh, it is today's Daf
Daf
Yomi.
Yomi.
Right, so it was just coincidentally I fell on this. I forgot where I came across it. In any case, one hand, Poik Chosi Ma'amad Vadi Shom, you go look around. You see that today all the B'nai Torah put on $100 and up cologne. Okay? So, is it forbidden? Well, I didn't find it in Shulchan Aruch. It is in the Rambam. So do you say, well, the Rambam said, well, if the Rambam said it, why didn't Shulchan Aruch? I'm just making it as an example. That's the issue of the
What,
issue.
it's mutter?
That you're not allowed to. But he says that you're allowed to on the body because it's a deodorant. As a deodorant, you could use it, but on your begodim, on your
Take
clothing,
Take away
it
the
is forbidden.
stench.
Right, so take it away. Anyway, so we have to go and get up there. Even if the ruling of this halachic decision may sometimes go against prior rulings of Achronim, what of it?
Where are you reading now?
In the footnote on page 287. I remember a classic argument, I don't know if it was directly or indirectly, between the Chazon Ish Zatzal and Moshe Feinstein. Blau went into the Vatican and brought out endless new manuscripts. And sometimes they would bring a Rashba, and it says the exact opposite of what we thought the Rashba said all the years.
Right.
I always forget who's who, so you'll forgive me. But one of the two held, I think Moshe Feinstein said, I don't care if the Rashba himself comes and says, that's not what I said. If it was accepted in Klal Yisrael that this is what the Rashba said, and we paskin like that Rashba, it doesn't matter.
It's like the Nova Shemayim.
Okay, but now we have, but the Rashba didn't say it. So it says, what do you mean? We thought it was based on an erroneous Rashba. We now know what the Rashba. I have to bring you an example. There was a fellow in 1924, Kostin. He was an ear, nose, throat doctor. And he said that the jaw relationship definitely had an effect on head and neck pain and earaches. And it was called Kostin syndrome after him. And the Merck Manual brings the thing. However, the Merck Manual says, something like in 1936, that Sisher and Zimmerman disproved Kostin syndrome, that it doesn't exist. And in the Merck Manual, it says, therefore, Kostin syndrome doesn't exist. The relation between the jaws and earaches, even though Goodfriend and Kelly and others in the early 1900s, disprove it. 10 years later, in 1946, Sisher and Zimmerman wrote a rebuttal. They retracted what they said 10 years earlier. Even though we can't understand it scientifically, after examining 150 patients and so whatever, 75 patients and 100-something ears, there's unquestionably a relationship between the two.
If you have a middle ear infection, you can't have jaw pain.
No, the opposite. But the jaw compressing, there could the inner ear, if you lost your posterior teeth, the back teeth, the overcompression of the meniscus and of this area can cause ear pain. So this was argued back and forth. So Sisher and Zimmerman retracted. They said it does exist. So Dr. Friedman, he must have been, I don't know, he looked 90 to me when he was at NYU. He quoted Sisher and Zimmerman in 36. I said, yeah, but there's Sisher and Zimmerman in 46. They retracted. We abide by Sisher and Zimmerman of 36. Tradition, he started singing tradition. In other words, I don't care if Sisher and Zimmerman retracted. And in the Merck Manual, until this day, the Bible of medicine, they quote the 1936 Sisher and Zimmerman and not the 1946. Why do I bring this? This is an ongoing tension between the traditionalists who say that's the way Sisher and Zimmerman decided. And I don't care if Sisher and Zimmerman themselves come and retract. So,
You can always find mistakes.
right, Ramosha holds,
All the
so on.
Rambams, including the Frankel Rambam,
Oh.
have Isha Niknas, Kesser, Shtar,
Great example. Great example.
Right, and Kesser and Shtar, they say.
In any case, Ramosha held, well, there was more and, Bimater Argunos.
I was in the Vatican, they showed me a manuscript which says, Shloshton min HaTorah. So, all three ways of being kind of a woman, only the eyes,
Okay,
according to this manuscript that they showed me.
really?
Yeah, Benny Blech
Well, that's
was part of the delegation, and he jumped up with joy.
In any case, Ramosha is definitive. there is room for change. Pinush knows Dovid, what are the needs of the times, if you can substantiate it. We too are definitely obligated to rule with innovation when it appears to us that we can be permissive. It is forbidden to act meekly. I'm going to take advantage and say something that was so beautiful. I was Zoch on Shabbos to bring this.
Innovation.
Innovation means to say that a tooth is part of a jaw, and therefore it's a limb, is an innovative idea. And that goes up against the psak that you can't put it back in. So on Shabbos I saw this quote. Because the humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkulas, the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed.
Right.
I'm going to tell you something beautiful. If you're sure, it's worth connecting with this one. But before that, the Meretz Chai says these types of failures to act, it's called malpractice. We have it in our profession. Malpractice by default. You can do malpractice by overdoing. When I got out of school, the number one lawsuit in California was for not diagnosing periodontal gum disease. Not offering the implant alternative became a malpractice suit, just as overutilization. I got to share with you, Rabbi Yeshua, a 40-year, this really for 40 years, tore away to me, and this is the quote that they brought. This is Sfas Emerson, this week's parasha. It's a tangent, but it's stupid.
Ibn Avkulas, is he the guy who sent up a tape to...
He's the one who said he wanted to send a carbon with a defect, with a pgam. And he could not come, because of his humility, he could not come to allow such a thing. Had he allowed it, which halachically was permissible, it turns out, then we could have saved the Beis Hamikdash. So his humility destroyed. And please listen, because this is really so valuable and so beautiful. I must share it. Even if it's not on topic, it's too beautiful to let go. For 40 years, I was plagued with a question. And I don't care if you don't like my answer, but how is it that the question didn't bother you? In Hilchos Deos, in the first halacha, the Rambam says, the middle road is the golden road, the golden path. We all know that, the way of the wise. And therefore, one should not be...
Except for two things.
Except for kas, anger, which we're going to leave now, because I have a separate mahalach there, how that works. And the second one is modesty. One should not be overly modest, one should not be underly modest. Go in the middle road. What are we going to do? And this is the classic example. So in chapter 2 he says, and then there are midos, there are traits one should not go in the middle, one should go to the extreme. Have him ma'od moshvar ruach. One must be modest, like Moshe Rabbeinu, to the very end. So the Rambam in Shmona Prakim delineates the spectrum of all midos, of too much, too little, overspending, stingy, go in the middle. And when it comes to modesty, first he says go in the middle, then he says this is an exception. And my question was, okay, it's an exception, but so why do you bring it as the classic example? So you have a shortage of examples, you go and bring as your cardinal example that which is the exception. It says in this week's Parshas Sfas Emerson, Tov Reish Lamed Beis, 32. 462. He says that Yisro, which means extra, unnecessary.
Not unnecessary.
Well, that's one answer. But Sfas Emerson says that Yisro got his name because he said on himself, I am unnecessary. I'm a nothing, I'm a nobody. So, he was a nothing and nobody all his life. What changed when he became Jewish? He said, I'll tell you what changed. So the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, who was originally one of the biggest Misnagdim, anti-Hasidim, became one of the biggest disciples of the Baal Shem Tov. He says, I heard from the Baal Shem Tov that one of the most dangerous things that a person could do is to be over humble, to feel like he's a nothing and a nobody. From Nachman of Breslov says that a person who walks around all day feels like he's a nothing and a nobody will become a nothing and a nobody. He says, what's with the Rambam? The Rambam says that you should go to the extreme. So he says over in Baal Shem Tov, let me explain it to you. And I'll proceed with something else. I was once with the Spinker Rebbe, Zechzag Baruch of Kahana from Yerushalayim. There's a Spinker in Bnei Brak, Spinker in America, but a Spinker in Yerushalayim. And he said in Parashat Vayigash, he said that it's nothing for a poor man to be mistapik mamur. For a poor person to make do with what he has is not a big deal. He doesn't have. To be mistapik mamur, to make do what you have, is over the wealthy man, like Yudah Nossi, who could put tongue and could put all the delicacies on the table, and he made do with minimum. So to him. He said, when Yisro, so the Sfas Emes is saying, when Yisro was a guy, Taka wasn't nothing to nobody. But when he became a Jew, and the Nefesh Chaim explains, he doesn't bring Nefesh Chaim, that a Jew runs all the world, the entire universe is run by a Jew, and a person with each mitzvah, what he can perform, no malach can do, is when a Jew of Yeshua realizes his power is if the world was created only for me, it was worth it. So on one hand, the Jew has to feel like he's a nothing and a nobody. On the other, he has to feel like he's the greatest thing that ever happened. And the both to Bishvili Nevarov.
Each mitzvah he gets a malach.
Each mitzvah he gets a malach and all the malach and whatever. So what's going on here? So the answer is that in modesty, the Sforno says in the first pasuk in Re'eh, he says basically there's nothing uglier than the middle. But also my antennas went up when I saw that years ago. Until I saw the Kol Yehuda on the... Well, that was what I would think. The Kol Yehuda in Sefer Kuzari says that's not against the Rambam. The Rambam says you should choose the middle road. But in that middle road, there's nothing more disgusting than mediocrity. You got to be the best on that middle road. Don't go to this extreme, don't go to that extreme. But in the middle road, you be the best. Says the Rosner, of course you take the middle road. That middle road, you got to be the best on the middle road. My teacher, Dr. Dick Barnes, used to always say, if you got to do patches for a patient because they don't have money, give them the best patches in the world. You're going to patch them up, give them the best patches in the world. That's what he used to say. So, says the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, since, and the Babich Rebbe, Zechar Tzaddik used to say that a person has two pockets. In one pocket, Anoka off of Abraham, a nothing and a nobody. In the other pocket, I'm the greatest thing that ever happened. And a balance between the two. Said Rabbi Yaakov Emden, a person has two eyes. With one eye he sees nothing and nobody. With the other eye he sees, if the whole world was made for me, it was worth it. That's why we have two eyes. Says the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, the middle road, the way you end up being the middle in modesty, is by middle. He says, and he quotes the Rambam, goes on to say, interesting, like Shlomo Melech said, Pales drochecha, level your midos, level your, in other words, like a seesaw. You don't have to sit in the middle of the seesaw. But if you put a balance to the seesaw, you'll end up with a seesaw that's balanced in the middle. And therefore, since a Jew has to believe there's a nothing and a nobody, and a Jew has to believe there's the greatest thing that ever happened, by believing these two things, he ends up in a moderation, in a blend between the two. This brought me tremendous simcha. In other words, it helped explain the Rambam, first of all, and it helped explain what seems to be two different things that you have to believe. No more, no less. This morning, I do Mishnayos. Different Mishnayos. Chaim Kanievsky says, you should, if you have having a challenge in life, you should learn the sugyas of that thing. You're having problems with authorities, he says, learn Eruvin. You're having problems, he says, if you're having problems with, I don't know, your eyesight, he says, you should learn Negoim, the Seches Negoim. So I was learning, I opened up my Mishnayos Negoim, Perek Beis, I think Halacha Gimel, if I'm not mistaken. And he says, unbelievable, I'm blown away. He says, a Kohen who has only one eye is not allowed to make the call if the nega on the wall is tar or tummy, is pure or not. I said, this is the answer. If he only has the eye that says no good, no good, but he doesn't have the eye that says the greatest thing, if he doesn't have that balance and he has only one eye, if he can only see the bad come to it, then he can't make the call. To make the call, you have to have both eyes, you have to have the moderation that comes not from being mediocre, but from being balanced.
That's why the Pasuk says, Chol Einei Ma'av.
Hey, that's there. From A, there's a concept. Okay, a thought I share with you. To me, it was a wonderful thing. So here we need the balance too. The humility of Zechar ben Avkulas without having your Moshe Feinstein. How could you sit on the side? Moshe Feinstein didn't know who he was. Chazonish didn't know who he was. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know who he was. They knew they were the greatest people of our generation. They felt they could have been much more with the gift they were given. So who are you, Rav Zcharia? I can't permit such a thing. These types of fellow used to act, said the Maratz Chayes. The rabbis thought Rabbi Zcharia was not proper. Because of his great modesty, he was afraid that other rabbis would accuse him. He did not think of himself as great enough, and this brought to a horrible destruction. I used to have heard several times from Shlomo Fisher, Shlita, you should have a four Shlema. Shlema, Dovid Yoinison, and Dvara, for four Shlema. He used to say, it says in Officer Rabbeinu Nosson, which it says that a tzaddik is like a kosher fish. What do you mean a tzaddik is like a kosher fish? You eat him at Shal Shudas?